All right, Mabel, I'll let you give a brief introduction to who you are, but I've gotten to know Mabel over the last couple of years during her extended times here in Hong Kong. She is Marshall's mother, for those of you that know Marshall. But Mabel, do you want to do a brief introduction of who is Mabel?
Oh, I was actually born and raised in Hong Kong. It was a long time ago. I'm 77, almost 78. And my father died the same year I was born. I was 9 months old. So we went through hard times. But I think through God's grace, we happened all to attend St. Paul's Co-ed. So you know St. Paul's Co-ed is the premium school in Hong Kong. And because we attend St. Paul's Co-ed, we all went to Hong Kong U. So I graduated from Hong Kong U. I graduated in 1968. And in 1967, there was rioting in Hong Kong, if you know any history. So at that time, a lot of people wanted to go abroad. By that time, I have two brothers in the US. So my mom sent me there saying that, just go there, leave Hong Kong. And so I attended UC Berkeley there. And while in the US, I met my husband. So in '69, we got married. He was a new Christian when we got married. And I think 5 or 6 years into the marriage, he left the church. But I raised both kids, Marshall and his sister. We never left the church, so we grew up. And my husband died in 2005. So I've been by myself. So I live in two places now. I live in the US with Marshall's sister, and I live in Hong Kong during the winter time. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Mabel, for that introduction. It's so good to have you here. I think one of the first times I met you, we got talking about the topic that we're going to converse about tonight. Now, we have a slide up there that talks about the definition of complementarianism and egalitarianism. And so that will be on the slide. But do you want to speak briefly to
Yes.
that, Mabel?
I have always questioned at the back of my mind, and nobody talked to me about it, but I see some things in the church that I thought was not just. For example, only men can be elders, only men can be pastors. And so I thought something is quite wrong with that. And there are specific instances, like I remember a missionary couple coming to our Chinese church, and the husband was allowed to speak as a speaker on Sunday morning, but the wife, they were partners in the missionary work, and she was not allowed to go up on the stage to talk, and she has to stand down there. So she is on the same level as everybody else who sat. And it's little things like that. Nobody brought up the unequal treatment of men and women. So I subconsciously knew something was wrong, but I don't know why and how to explain it. And after my husband passed away in '05, I have a chance to read some books that shook me to the core. And I knew that something is very wrong with that teaching. So I've been looking into it. So I will just briefly explain what is egalitarian and what is complementarian, since those are the two common terms that you always hear people say. And there's a ton of misunderstanding around that term. Now, first of all, egalitarian means, to me, equal opportunity. It does not mean you're the same. It doesn't mean we're all the same. We're obviously not all the same. If you think of the US, the Declaration of Independence say all men are created equal. That's what that equal means. Not all men are the same. Some are taller, some are shorter, some are fatter, they're not the same. So that's a myth, and I don't want you to make that mistake, thinking that egalitarian means we believe everybody is the same. No, we don't. And we just believe that everybody should be afforded equal opportunity. So if a sister is gifted to be a pastor, she should be able to be a pastor. That's what the word egalitarian means. Now, on the other hand, somebody coined the word complementarian to mean a caste system. I call it male headship or male supremacy, although, I mean, they deny it's male supremacy, but it's a male headship thing, like men are created by God to be the leader, and women are created by God to be submissive to men. So right away, it has nothing to do with complementarianism. So the word is already corrupt. So personally, I am very unwilling to use that word, but I have to use it because that's a word that's commonly being used. So complementarianism basically has a hierarchy. Egalitarianism does not have hierarchy. So if you don't remember anything I said, remember that.
Thank you, Mabel. I think, would you agree that Mabel's passionate about this topic? Eric and I also grew up in a more traditional church that definitely practiced complementarianism, as you've described, where the elders and the pastors had to be men, and I didn't know the word for it back then. This is just how it was done. So you grew up in Hong Kong, you moved to the U.S., you're in a Chinese church.
Always Chinese church.
So tell me a bit of how you experienced complementarianism in your church, in your home, and in your culture.
Now, complementarianism is not a thing when I grew up. It was practiced in the church, but nobody talked about it. You don't have to verbally say, oh, we're complementarian. Like in the US now, actually the complementarian idea is not on the surface until 1970s or 80s. Nobody talked about it. And so now they really push it. But when I grew up, nobody pushed that. Nobody talked about it. You just automatically assume that the men are the leaders. You don't have a sermon on it. And of course, the Chinese culture is very patriarchal. You can grow up in a patriarchal culture and you are patriarchal without realizing you're patriarchal. For example, those of you who know Cantonese or Mandarin, how do we call our daughters children? We call it 外孙, 外孙, right? If you know Chinese, you know what it is. So what does that mean? That means outside grandchildren. If you have a daughter and she has children, and those are your outside grandchildren, 外孙. And if you have a son, the son have children, they're called inside grandchildren. Now that's very patriarchal, but I never questioned it. And so that is the culture, is the sexism, the patriarchal culture is very subtle. It's very pervasive. And you're in it and you don't realize it. So not only the Chinese, but Chinese are influenced by American culture. For example, you go to a wedding, they always say, who give this bride away? And you never question it. What's wrong with that? Who is giving her away? Nobody's giving her away. Why you ask that question? Who is giving her away? See, that's patriarchal. It's like she belonged to her father. She is his possession, and now she becomes her new husband's possession. But I never questioned that. I mean, it's very pervasive. It's by default. For example, recently the 737 MAX jet had an accident. The door flew open, and the pilot was very calm, and she landed the plane. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know it. I automatically assumed it's a man. Until this morning, I read she landed the plane calmly. So we are all in this culture, had neck deep in it, and we don't know it.
Thank you, Mabel. That's good. So we had talked about this topic a couple of times at community church and sermons. If you want to go into more detail, I can point you to those links. But I thought, what a wonderful opportunity to hear from Mabel. She has studied this more than I have, has went to the conferences, and is very passionate about it. And so this idea of the male being the spiritual leader of the home, you've already alluded to this, that your husband was a younger Christian, that he left the faith and came back. And under complementarianism, he really still should be the spiritual leader of the home. Talk about why that doesn't make sense.
Okay, I'm on some Facebook groups that talk about this, and I just laugh. And when people say that it's God's divine order for the husband to be the spiritual leader of the family, and instead of arguing about what hermeneutics, exegesis, Bible passages, get very academic. I'm basically not a very academic person. I'm just a very practical person. So I tell them the story of my marriage. So my husband was a new Christian, so we went to church for about 6 years. We moved 5 times during that 6 years. He doesn't make friends easily in church. So after about 6 years, he stopped going to church. He never, of course he wouldn't stop me from going. He respects my faith. So I brought Marshall and Jody to church all these years. We never stopped going to church. And he took early retirement. And after he sat at home for a while, he told me he wanted to go back to church because he realized that he had a good life because of factors not under his control. He is smart, he is capable, he always have a job. And so he said that I need to go back to church because I realize it's God in my life. So he went back to church, and he died 10 years after he retired. So when he went back to church, he went to all the Sunday school classes. Every single Sunday school class in our Chinese church, he went. And he ended up in my class. I taught seniors. And he said that you can explain the Bible better than any other teacher because they tend to show off their Bible knowledge. They tend to have complicated handouts, 3 single-space pages a week. They kind of compete with each other to see who can talk the more. But you explain, and with real-life examples, you make the Bible come alive for me. So he came to my Bible class, or Sunday school class, and he was diagnosed with inoperable cancer. And he died 6 months after that, the diagnosis. And the first thing that out of his mouth, after he learned of the diagnosis, and he come and asked me, am I saved? So I said, well, do you know that you're a sinner? Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior? And he said yes to all my questions. I said, of course you're saved. And he was very happy with that. He never, ever, I've never seen a patient like that. Never complained about his illness. Never complained about the fact that he was dying, that he will die. He didn't bother him. He was going to die because he's going to see God. And I want to ask those who push this, the husband is the spiritual leader, to my face. And I said, I was his spiritual leader. Was it wrong? Did I do something wrong? Should I, like John Piper said, oh, honey, I so much want you to be my spiritual leader. I don't do any such thing. So I answer all his questions. And whenever he have a question on faith, he came to me and he asked me. So when you think of real life example, all this divine order of who is here makes 0 sense.
All right. Thanks, Mabel. Now, you hinted at this, but when did you start to question sort of this male headship, hierarchy, patriarchy type of view?
I think at the back of my mind, I question it, but not in an organized, I'm not very conscious about what I was thinking. But 1 year, that was after my husband passed away, my sister-in-law in California gave me a Chinese book to read. And her good friend, one of her good friends was one of the 3 authors of that book. And it's a book in Chinese. So she said, my Chinese is not very good. Why don't you read this book? I don't understand it. So I read the book, and the book simply goes through some of the clobber verses in the Bible, saying that woman cannot have authority, woman this, that, and the other. And it gave me a clear explanation of what those verses actually mean. And that book is the first book I read. And after that, there's no going back. And I realized that I've been interpreting the Bible all wrong, or what I heard from the pastors on the interpretation of these Bible verses were all wrong. So I started to read books. The first book I read was 2 Views on Women in Ministry. And I have a dictionary on one side. And I go through the book because I don't know the terms. I don't know what paradigm was. I don't know what oncology was. And from then on, then I started to read articles, and I started to gain a clear understanding of what is God's heart for us.
Thank you, Mabel. Now, in your handouts there, you'll see a couple of things. One are reflection questions for the ministry time. The other are Bible passages that Mabel has picked out that are special to her, and some of the notes that she put in for those passages themselves. So you can definitely take that away with you. But what we'd like to do, if there are questions from you all for Mabel, from what she's said so far, we'd like to give you the chance to ask those now. And I can bring the mic around to you. If you have a question, do slip up your hand, and we'll ask Mabel a question. All right, Kay.
Hi, I'm Kay. I'm dying to find out what was the reception of your views from the church in general, because it's not a view that's widely held.
So what did the church you were going to think about your new views, Mabel?
I think I started to talk about it in West Houston Chinese Church. West Houston Chinese Church is a very good church. We have very good pastors, and they have come a long way. So I started to talk to the senior pastor about it, but I don't think it's anything that I said. It's at that time my daughter had finished going to seminary. She went to Gordon Conwell, and the senior pastor asked her to come back and work as a youth minister. And she was a very good minister. So everybody can see that when she accepted the job, she said, I expected to be ordained, even though we never ordained women. And it's not anything that I said. Is when they actually see a woman at work, and you see that the Holy Spirit can use a woman, and they don't want to lose her. And so eventually, they ordained another woman minister, the children's minister, because she is a dynamite. Our church is thriving because we have a good women's minister. And so she was the first one to be ordained a pastor at West Houston Chinese Church. And after her, then my daughter. And after my daughter is somebody else. And now, it doesn't mean that church is egalitarian, no. They still subscribe to a lot of patriarchal thinking. Women are still not elders. So that's for another day. But Yes, they know, and someone had once told me that I think if you talk about it, you're seeking to divide the church. And what I told him is the church is already divided along gender lines. I'm trying to break down the wall between the two sexes so that there's no division in the church. And that was my answer.
All right, thank you, Mabel. Let's give Mabel a hand. She will hang out after the service if you have questions or even during the ministry time. And we usually don't record the Thrive services, but we recorded tonight. So if you do want to watch it or share it, it will be on our YouTube channel. So thank you, Mabel. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Welcome.